A desert planet with twin suns.
His name is Boba Fett.
Boba Fett? Where?
I am Boba Fett.
Welcome back to Twin Sun Talks, folks, and welcome to our second Book of Boba Fett review and breakdown. Let's not waste any time and let's dive straight into I Have Spoken.
I have spoken.
Not gonna lie, guys, there's been about a 6 to 7 hour gap in between these last two audio clips because my stinking microphone decided to stop working mid-recording. So that's been super fun to deal with. A little glimpse behind the scenes there. But anyways, now that I've finally got this thing to work, we're going to be talking about episode 2 of the Book of Boba Fett, the Tribes of Tatooine. And, so as usual, I'm going to be doing my non-spoiler review, followed by my full spoiler breakdown and review, and then I'm going to go into some theories at the very end. So if you haven't watched the episode yet, but you want to get a general idea of my thoughts, then stick around. In a few seconds I'm going to be doing my non-spoiler review, and then if you don't want to get it spoiled, then feel free to pause this, go watch it, come back, and listen to anything that I found notable throughout the rest of the episode. It'll still be here whenever you're done. So as far as my non-spoiler thoughts go, this episode was super interesting. It had an extremely vintage Star Wars feel to it, once again definitely putting us into that original trilogy mindset. The development for Boba continues to be spot on, the storytelling is excellent, the visuals are stunning, and the experience was on point. So overall, I really enjoyed this episode. I don't feel like I can say too much more without spoiling it, so if you don't want it to be spoiled, then I would suggest that you stop listening. So spoiler warning, spoiler warning, spoiler warning, spoiler, 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 spoiler. Anyways, let's move on. So, first of all, Nightwind. That's the name of the assassin group that attacked Boba and Fennec at the end of the first episode. Don't know too much about them. They're supposedly hired by the mayor. They are unable to operate outside of Hutt space legally. So, that's about all that we know about them. I can't say too much else. The threat by Fennec with the Rancor was super funny and a cool throwback. And I was like, oh, maybe they're using the Rancor that we see in the Bad Batch, but no, it's just an empty threat. But it was funny to see the fear in his eyes. The mayor is an Ithorian with a translation device, which is something that we saw in the Clone Wars. His name is Mok Shaiz. And the interaction with him and Boba shows far more confidence from Boba, which I appreciate. The mayor still tries to kind of push him around, but Boba seems a little more sure of himself than he did with like the other bosses of Mos Espa. Moving on to the Hutts, they are the twins, which we haven't seen anything. We've seen people like Gardula before and Zero, but we haven't seen the twins, and they're related to Jabba. They're his cousins. They reference Hutta, which is the Hutt homeworld, whenever Boba's kind of dismissing the possibility that they're involved in anything. And they're obviously very powerful with much influence, and we see them carried on the litter, kind of like how everyone expects Boba to be paraded around. It's kind of funny to see all the Niktos kind of straining under the weight. But I mean, I don't think there's too much to say about them. I thought that it's notable that the Hutts are still involved in Tatooine politics. They haven't just let it go, because it is obviously a very influential portion of the criminal underworld, and so it makes sense that they would still want a hand in that cookie jar. And with the Hutts, we see, and I might mispronounce his name, but Black Chrysantan. I think that's how you say his name. And he is a massive Wookiee bounty hunter from the comics, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know too much about him, but I know that he worked for Jabba, and he worked for Vader at one point, and that he is absolutely brutal. I read up a bit on him before recording this episode, and so this is kind of off the top of my head from reading up, but I'm pretty sure that he has like metal implanted into his fists to make it so that he can literally crush skulls with his hands. He was kind of exiled from Kashyyyk for his kind of brutalistic nature. He seems super, super awesome. And a little side note that I don't have in my notes, but I think it's worth noting. Boba wore a braid of Wookiee hair originally, which I would assume melted off while he was in the Sarlacc. But I'm sure there's a little bit of bad blood between the two for that. And you see him, he's super intimidating, and I'm super, super excited to see more of him later, because I think we will. But yeah, more on Black Chrysanthemum later. I might call him BK or Black K or something like that. I don't know. Chrysanthemum is just kind of, I don't know. It doesn't quite roll off the tongue. The Pikes. Who called it? I called it. I said that I thought that criminal syndicates like the Pikes might be involved in this, and that is exactly what we got. In the flashbacks, while he's kind of reflecting on his time with the Tuscans, we see the Pikes in control of this train that kind of goes through the Tuscans' territory and takes them out kind of as they go. And the Pikes are spice stealers, and spice, for those of you who don't know, is kind of Star Wars slang for drugs. They were introduced in the Clone Wars, and they reference the spice mines on Kessel, which obviously we see the Pikes operating there in Solo, a Star Wars story, and we see them with Wookiee labor and all that sort of stuff. They relied heavily on slave labor, which seems to not sit very well with Boba, and it's unclear why necessarily, but if I had to guess, it's because his father/donor Jango used to be a slave, hence the name of the ship Slave One. It was because of his history of being a slave. So I don't know. Maybe we'll get a little more development on that later, but it seems like Boba doesn't like the Pikes all that much for that reason, and it's super cool to see them in live action because they don't quite look the same. They don't quite look like what we saw in the animation, but I mean, Dooku doesn't look anything like he does in live action in Clone Wars, so it was kind of cool to get a little bit of live action canonical, I don't even know how to call it, anatomy for the Pikes. Moving on to the Tuscans, we get more development on their way of life. Seeing the creation of their gaffy sticks was pretty interesting, and giving them access to technology like the speeder bikes and better weapons will shift the balance of power on Tatooine in their favor, because they know the topography of Tatooine better than anybody, and now they have the means to really seize power. So that's going to be an interesting thing to see moving forward. Their acceptance of Boba without completely transforming him into a Tuscan is rather interesting too, and while my knowledge about this, I'm pulling from legend, so it doesn't necessarily exist, but what I can tell is that they tended to, whenever they took outsiders into their kind of cult of personality, they would completely alter them to be like Tuscans. They would give them the bandages, the masks, everything, and we see that to an extent with Boba, where they give him garments of their own culture, but we don't see them giving him the Tuscan masks, the Tuscan bandages that you kind of layer on as you get older. Stuff like that is kind of glossed over, but they still obviously very much respect him, because not just anyone gets a gaffy stick. That's a really big deal. The lizard thing was pretty ridiculous, but I kind of loved it. Like, it was like Boba was tripping, man. It was kind of amazing. I kind of liked seeing that, where he's on drugs and he's wandering through the freaking desert, gets to like the last tree on Tatooine where they get the gaffy stick wood from. And then, I mean, I thought that it was super cool. I don't know. It's kind of a weird thing, but weird things are fun sometimes. And then it was interesting hearing a little bit about the history of Tatooine, because this isn't super well known, but Tatooine used to be covered in oceans and like rainforests, and we hear a little bit about that from the Tuscan chief. But we don't know too much about the lore, but it is a little interesting to hear that like something happened to Tatooine. We don't necessarily know what, but something happened to where the oceans and the lush forests are just gone, and it's replaced by a planet that is 100% desert. And I don't know. I think that's kind of interesting. I think we might hear a little bit more about this either in this show or in Kenobi, which is also going to be set on Tatooine. The Nikto Raiders, the symbol on their equipment that they sprayed, or on their equipment and what they sprayed onto the farmers, the farmer's home whenever we saw them in the last episode, it's actually kind of close to the Hutty symbol for the letter B. I don't know. I'm kind of grasping at straws here, so I don't really know. I don't know the significance, but I think that that's going to come into play, and I would watch out for that little symbol where it's almost like two backwards, two L's back to back, where one of them's backwards. I don't really know, or two J's. I don't know what it is, but I'm kind of interested to see what it is. I was listening to Star Wars Theories breakdown, and he thinks that they're water raiders that worked for Jabba. They collected like a water tax. I don't really know. I don't think that we have anything super solid to go off of, but that would kind of make sense because it wasn't super far from whenever Jabba had died, so they might have still been doing that stuff around the time of the flashback. So I'm not entirely sure, but it's just something to think about, that it could be potentially a Hati symbol for the letter B. And then just a little bit more about the flashbacks. We got a little bit of them whenever he's tripping out on whatever drugs the Tuscans gave him when the lizard was in his nose. But we got a little bit more of a look at Kamino, which I hope we get a full-fledged look at Kamino in some sort of flashback moving forward. Because as much as I love these Tuscan looks, not entirely. I think that it's time to kind of move on to a couple other things. So, but I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. So as far as my review goes, I think that this is another excellent episode. My hope, like I said, is that the episodes become less flashback-centered moving forward and we get a little bit more present-day Boba. That being said, the subtle tie-ins to existing lore with Chrysantan and the Pikes have really got me super, super excited, because those weren't like the groundbreaking cameos that people are looking for, with people like Han Solo or Cad Bane or even someone like Hondo. Like that, it's not like earth-shattering stuff, but I think that the Black Chrysantan's presence in this episode is probably going to be the headline appearance of this episode. But I think that we got a lot to look forward to moving forward. This show is very, very personal, and it fully feels like Star Wars to me. I don't know how else to describe it, but it just feels like Star Wars, and it's something super refreshing that we haven't gotten with too many Star Wars projects since Disney's taken over, in my opinion. I feel like they felt less and less like Star Wars, save moments like Clone Wars Season 7. I think that the shows have been what have been driving Star Wars so far in this new era. In as much as I love things like Rogue One and Solo, I think that the shows like Clone Wars Season 7, The Bad Batch, and Mandalorian, and now Book of Boba Fett have been really what's driving the fandom and keeping the fandom alive, because the movies, save the excellence of Rogue One, have been pretty weak. And so I'm super, super happy with the direction that they're taking this in. And I think that Favreau and Filoni really know what they're doing, and I'm super excited to see. I love the vibes of the show, and I really can't wait for more. So that being said, let's dive into visions. I'm going to talk a little bit about what I think we might see moving forward.
To continue, we need one singular vision. My vision.
So at the beginning, whenever Fennec and Boba and the Gamorreans are walking through the streets of Mos Espa, the emphasis on the Trandoshans in that scene makes me think that it's pretty likely that they're going to introduce Bossk. And that's kind of their way of like orienting people to seeing Trandoshans. They're like, okay, these guys are of significance. And whenever they bring in Bossk, it's going to be like, okay, you have that association in mind where it's not quite as confusing. Even though Bossk is pretty established for like people that know Star Wars well, for the more casual fans, I think that that's just a little bit of a helping hand in that regard. The presence of Black Chrysantan, with that in mind, gives me the impression that there are more bounty hunters that are to come, with like, because we're just kind of getting a taste of like, hey, these gangsters that Boba's kind of making angry right now, they got his old buddies that he used to work with and used to kind of collude with whenever he was a bounty hunter. And I think that that's leaving the door open for Bossk, Dengar, Cad Bane, any of those guys to come back and kind of give Boba a hard time because they're hired by these other people. And it's going to be kind of like a shrug, like, hey man, no hard feelings, but this is business. And this is kind of what I do now. And we used to be on the same side, but now things have changed. I hope that we get some Jango content once we're done with the Tuscan storyline as far as the flashbacks. I think having Tamora Morrison back in the role of Jango would be super interesting to see. Kind of get some time with him as a kid and stuff like that. I think that would be super, super interesting. And then I think that Boba will potentially at the end of the show be working with the Tuscans to kind of solidify his rule on Tatooine. Because, dude, if you have a network of sand people at your disposal as kind of a personal army to kind of be your eyes and ears around Tatooine, that is so much more OP than Jabba could have ever dreamed of being. And I don't think that people fully understand the significance of him having an alliance with the Tuscans, because I think that that's going to play big into this, and that Boba's going to be a man of great influence. And I think that he's going to be done being nice here pretty soon. Once people start to really make him mad, I think that the show's going to get really, really juicy, and I'm super excited to see where it goes. That being said, yeah, that's about all that I have for this episode. I'm super excited for next week. Stay tuned on Monday. I'm going to be talking about The Chosen One, and my thoughts on how the sequels kind of put that how the sequels kind of put that prophecy into question, at least as far as how George intended it to be. And yeah, make sure you go follow me on Instagram if you don't already, at Twin Sun Talks. I'm doing a 31-day challenge in the month of January to kick off 2022. Today was day 5. This is the 5th day of January, and I talked about my favorite starship, which is, spoiler alert, the Millennium Falcon. So if you want to hear my reasoning, go ahead and read the caption on my Instagram post over on my Instagram page. And so that's about all that I have for today. You've taken your first steps into a larger world. May the Force be with you, and I will see y'all in the next episode. Bye, friends.